Hi, welcome to Chair Chats, the lifestyle talk show with a disability twist. I'm your host, Pauline Victoria. Parenting is a natural part of life. All of us have parents, and many of us want to become parents. But when you have a disability, the experience changes a bit for us and our children. I ran into a father the other day who has 2 children under the age of 6, and he has recently lost all his eyesight. I could tell he was struggling with the idea of not being able to do for his children what he used to do or what he wanted to do. And I told him, don't let what you can't do determine your value as a parent. Today, we're going to talk about parenting with a disability with 2 other women who are co-founders of the Disabled Parenting Project and moms themselves. Please welcome Erin Andrews and Ayers. Thank you, ladies, for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
Okay, so you 2 are moms. Erin, can you tell us how many children you have and what their ages are?
Yes, I have 2 children, ages 7 and 4, and then I also have a grown stepson.
And Kara?
Yeah, so I have 3 kids. My oldest is 11, 8, and then I have an 8-year-old daughter, and then a just turned 2-year-old daughter as well.
Oh, wow. Oh, all different stages of life. What was your experience like becoming first-time moms?
Well, I think that I've known for a long time that I wanted to be a mother, and at the time that I got pregnant with my son, I was a single mom, or I was single and disabled. So I think that also was a challenge, but probably more for other people than me. I've never doubted that I would be able to figure things out in terms of caring for my children. And, I think, a lot of times people who've had disabilities for a long time, we get very good at coming up with solutions. And so I was confident. And so when I had my son, I just kind of found my own way of doing things and talked to other moms who had similar disabilities than mine. And that really helped, especially about the childbirth part, because I really wanted to know how it went for other women with similar disabilities. And that was very reassuring for me.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Kara? What was your experience like becoming a first-time mom?
Yeah, like Erin, I received a lot of great support from other moms with my disability is osteogenesis imperfecta. And so it's a genetic condition. So some of the lead up to my daughter's birth, related to decisions around testing, genetic testing. And I think that really brings up some deep questions of identity and your views on disability and I realized, abruptly that how you feel about disability is different than necessarily how you feel about having a child who may have the same disability. So my husband also has osteogenesis imperfecta. So when we kind of pictured what parenthood would be like, we knew that the odds were about 75% that our biological children would have OI. But true to, I guess, what most people say about parenting is you really can't predict it or plan it exactly. And so neither of our biological daughters actually have OI. And I think what really throws many people for a loop with that is that they kind of take a sigh of relief and say that, oh, thank goodness, you didn't pass on your disability. And while we love them exactly how they are and wouldn't want them to change in any way and wouldn't want them to have our disability because that's not who they are, I think what people don't get is kind of what you put in your head is what to expect about parenting. And in our unique case, because of the nature of our disability, we anticipated that we would be raising a child with our disability. So being a first-time mom to a baby and then a toddler, and then growing up to a non-disabled child has also been interesting. And I think there's lots of first-time experiences with parenting. I also adopted a child, so first-time adoption experiences are really unique too. Our child was older. We met him at 7 for the adoption. So learning to form those attachments. And again, it was a reminder of like, there's no handbook for this. You know, all that you learn about bonding with your child is based on the assumption that your child is a newborn, most of it. So again, I had to go back to the peer community, and in this case, adoptive parents, and some adoptive parents with disabilities themselves. But my strengths that Erin also mentioned in terms of figuring it out and adapting have definitely helped me along these first time paths.
Yeah. Well, I'm a mom myself too, and he's 12. He'll be going on 13 next month. It's hard to believe. But I know, like you, both of you, I knew that whatever physical challenges would come up, I felt confident that I would be able to figure it out. What I did not expect after I gave birth and we brought him home, was being confronted with not being able to care for him the way I wanted to care for him. Because of my disability, I couldn't pick him up. I couldn't breastfeed him. I couldn't, just change his diaper. So my family really stepped up. My husband, my other stepchildren really stepped up to those things, but I couldn't do that. And as a mother, you want to nurture. And it was almost like he reminded me more of that I was disabled. And I got really angry and depressed. And of course, you're going through hormonal changes anyway. So then you add that on top of it. Were there any unexpected challenges that either of you had that you ran into, and how did you overcome them?
I think I run into these all the time, and I hope that I overcome them. But the most obvious one in my life right now is my toddler reminds me that, the family dynamic, when you change family dynamics, it can, some things help, some things make it more challenging. So my first daughter was a toddler once too, obviously. But at that time we only had one child. And so we got to that point where my youngest is right now, where it's really difficult to be out in the community with her because she is so fast and doesn't listen to safety boundaries or anything like that. So we really have to be careful with where we choose to go without support from others. Whereas my first child, it felt like that conflict didn't come up as often because we just didn't, go to those places. Well, now that I have 3, we have my older daughter has a gymnastics meet, and my son wants to go to this school carnival. And so I really, want to do those full family things. How we cope with that and overcome that is we either enlist support from family, friends, or sometimes paid support. Whenever I interview babysitters, I also look for if they're comfortable coming out in the community with us. So we either need support in those activities, or we divide and conquer. And one of my husband or I stays home with a toddler, or because we try to balance not putting too much stress on our older ones in terms of we don't want, they're too young to be responsible for a toddler in an outside place. So getting support is how we mostly cope, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I can relate to that because when both of mine were toddlers, I had that same problem with just trying to keep them safe, and just the physicality of that was a big challenge. But another thing I was thinking of that has been a challenge for me that I guess I didn't really anticipate, although perhaps I should have, was what it's like for me to take my children to preschool or elementary school, any place where there are a lot of other kids around, because I'm a triple amputee and I've always dealt with staring. That's pretty normal, and I have been able to ignore it. And if it's children, most of us in the disability community say, let them ask questions, because parents will try to hush their children and say, oh, don't talk to her, that's rude. And it gives the impression that disability is something shameful, and obviously we don't feel that way. But it's been kind of continuous to where every time, they're in preschool and they move up a class, and they're always moving somewhere. You're all the time exposed to new children, and new children means new questions. And I think where it was a struggle for me was when I saw that it was really bothering my son. So I would go to pick him up and the kids would kind of swarm me, and they had a lot of questions and they wanted to know about my wheelchair. And the problem is just like, I'm just here to get my son, and he wants my attention and deserves my attention. And it was just really hard to kind of continuously face that. And so now we're kind of going through the same thing with my daughter. She's 4, and I can tell she's starting to notice, like, why are they swarming my mom? And then we pulled out of daycare the other day, and she said she saw a woman walking on the street, and she said, "Hey, that mommy has legs," like as if having legs was really a bizarre thing for a mom to have. So I got a kick out of that. But the big way that I've overcome it is just I haven't like solved it, overcome it, but is not to shy away, not to avoid it. So instead of getting frustrated or avoidant, I make a schedule with the schools where I go in and with my child, and we pick a book and bring a book about either a parent or a child with a disability, and we read it, and then I answer some questions. And that kind of helps, the pressure is off. I'm not such a novelty all of the time. And then it also allows my children to kind of be part of the process.
I've had my son say, I wonder what it's like to have a normal mom. And I'm like, oh, I don't know how to answer that. But I know, and he knows, the experience of growing up is different because I'm not a quote unquote normal mom. Because he sees his other friends who have moms who make dinner for them, and he has to help me make dinner. And so there's a lot of different dynamics that are different in our home than it is in other homes. How do you talk to your children about those kinds of things? And maybe you haven't been confronted with those questions yet, but if you have, how do you talk to your children about the difference in dynamics and maybe the differences of having a mom with a disability, and maybe what are good things about it?
I think that's a really important question, and it really relates to, I think, some of the issues that we face as disabled parents, and particularly as disabled mothers, is that people will often express this concern that we are somehow using our children as caretakers, or in some other way, kind of stealing their childhood or something like that. And I just find it so interesting that when a child is doing a task, for example, my son's big thing that he does every day is he empties the dishwasher when he gets home from school. And having a disabled mom, people may assume that he's doing that because I can't, or that I'm using him for help. But if it wasn't a disabled mom, that's a pretty developmentally appropriate task for a child to be doing. And it's important, at least in our family, that he contribute, that both of our children, contribute in some way to the household. So, I think that in talking to my son about it, I just try to talk to him. I talk to him all the time about disability. We don't always, we're not around other people with disabilities every single day. I wish we were, but I really do try to take advantage of those opportunities. And I explain to him that, I'm a disabled person and I'm proud to be disabled, and that, people might stare or they might ask questions. And I just try to tell him, please feel free to talk to me. You don't ever have to worry about hurting my feelings or upsetting me, if someone says something mean, or if you have some feelings that are, sad or angry. But we haven't gotten to a real in-depth conversation. He's 7, so I know we're probably getting close, and perhaps Kara has with her oldest too.
Yeah, I more so have with my daughter is 8, and she's my biological daughter, so we've had more of these years to have these conversations, and she seems to be a little more reflective in that way. My son actually has a disability, so I feel like sometimes we're playing catch up in terms of building his identity around his disability and also trying to help him understand how our disability as his parent fits into this whole mess. So I think some of the more hard to answer questions have come from my daughter, in that I try to frame most of the challenges that we experience, help her see that it isn't really directly coming from our disability as much as society's approach of society's response to it, or society's failure to just be basically accepting and accessible. I'm really upfront with her too, and sometimes I apologize. I make it clear that I'm apologizing for not for something that I did or was caused by my disability, but that I'm more like validating that I know that was hard. Similar to like what Erin mentioned, we've also really encountered with different kind of social settings with her where, most recently, a couple weeks ago, my husband took her to a gymnastics meet, and the awards were upstairs, and there was only a freight elevator that was not intended for people to get up there. And so after this whole big production, they get him on the freight elevator and they take him up. And when the doors opened, they opened like on the stage where all of the gymnasts were like staring at him. And so, my daughter is very careful not to ever indicate or say that she is embarrassed. But I try to explain to her that like it's not saying you're embarrassed by me to say that these are difficult social situations, that most kids don't have to navigate. And so we talk about that, and I also try to explain to them that they are a part of the disability community. I believe that siblings of people with disabilities are still a larger part of the disability community. I explain the difference that no, you don't have a disability, because when she was a toddler, she would say like, I'm going to get a wheelchair too. I would say, no, you're not. But I still believe she's part of that larger, when you look at disability as a culture, our families are part of that too. And she doesn't have my disability, but she's definitely influenced by it every day. And all three of my kids are, but she and I have right now the more in-depth conversations about it.
What advice would you give to that father I was describing earlier, who recently became blind and is now struggling with his identity and value as a parent, because he can't just take them to the park so easily because he can't watch out for their safety, or there are just different things that he has to now learn or relearn because of his new disability. But he's struggling internally. He's struggling. And I know the Disabled Parenting Project is a great platform for people to receive peer support, like you both noted was really important when you became parents. I didn't have that. I wish I did have that when I was becoming a parent, because I think it would have helped me quite a bit. But you guys do exist now. And so for someone who, like that father, is struggling internally with those kinds of things, what advice would you be able to offer?
I think, helping connect him to people he views as peers, whether that would be based on acquired disability, might be a good start. What I've really learned from my experience in connecting to the larger disabled parenting community is how much we can learn from each other across disability types, even from practical tips to, I know I learned from a blind parent how she filled her kids, when you go to a restaurant and the pop or soda machines are up really high. I saw that she filled them without overflowing them by sticking like her finger just to get to know when the drink rose to the top. So even from learning practical strategies to how we navigate these challenging different milestones or developmental periods for kids, but I think also more so those feelings of self-worth and those really hard, I think it's human nature to want to provide everything that we can for our children. And sometimes I know I get stuck on, and it sounds like maybe this parent gets stuck on really specific things, that it helps me, like my daughter wanted to learn to ice skate, and I'm like, oh no, I can't teach her to ice skate. It helps me to like widen the lens to realize like, okay, first of all, I can get some support to get her to try that. Turns out she tried it once and hated it, so that worked out. But also I can widen the lens and realize that like a spontaneous trip to the park that might not be in the cards for us right now or for him right now, but that doesn't make or break parenting. I mean, very few people look back on their childhood experience and say, gosh, I wish my dad could have, done something very specific that he can't do right now. People look back on our childhood and think about their parents related to how they felt. Did they feel loved? Did they feel connected with? Did they feel like their parents were engaged? And it sounds like, he can do all those things as a parent. So that's where I would start.
Yeah, I completely agree with Kara. I work in my career as a psychologist with a lot of people who have acquired disabilities, and parenting is something that comes up quite often. And, I think that it's really important to think, again, the specific versus the general, like Kara was saying, because we have these ideas sometimes about parenting that are more symbolic than anything. So, for example, a very common sentiment that I will get from a man who has sustained an injury and is now disabled is to say something like, I'm never going to be able to throw a ball around with my son, right? And so it's interesting to kind of unpack that, because throwing a ball around with your son is symbolic. It has to do with masculinity, and it has to do with American culture and what we value. And it really gets to values. And, if you look at, okay, why do you want to throw a ball around with your son? Oh, because you don't want to spend time with him. Okay, right? That's a value. I want to do something with him. So those are the values. And it's like, all right, well, how can we get you to be living your values in a way where your disability doesn't necessarily get in the way, right? So even though, they might not be able to do a handful of tasks, which all of us have things we can't do. And, non-disabled parents have plenty of things they cannot do. I will guarantee you that. I mean, they may theoretically be able to do it, but like ice skating, I don't know too many parents who really can do that. So, I think that, again, it's just really about values, getting down to what is the value. And like Kara was saying, that's what your kids are going to remember. What are the values that you instilled? How did you make them feel? And I don't think that they're going to come back and say, oh, well, you didn't do this one thing with me. And actually, conversely, and this is some of the research that we've been looking at, Kara and myself and our colleague Robin Powell, is looking at, what are the positive aspects that parenting with a disability can bring. And, anecdotally, we know that, both children of disabled parents and disabled parents themselves have identified positive aspects. And I think, as we do this research and as we see research on disabled parenting, thank goodness, growing and expanding all over the place, that, maybe 10 years from now, we're going to be able to look at science and say, hey, there are really good things about having a disabled parent, and maybe even some things that, a non-disabled parent couldn't offer. I really do believe that.
I really love that. I want to thank you, Erin and Kara, for being great moms and sharing your insight. If people wanted to get in touch with the Disabled Parenting Project, because I know that peer support would have been invaluable to me, and if there are parents out there watching now or potential people with disabilities who want to become parents, the Disabled Parenting Project would be a great resource. So what is a way that they can get involved?
Well, I think first stop, if people are on Facebook, we have both a page where you can kind of see things that we've shared as an organization, but also we have just started a Facebook group that parents have really responded well to. And I can't remember the number but it's growing fast. It's a very active group for discussions. And we do have a couple of questions that we ask people before they enter, because we hope it will be a safe place, as safe as Facebook can be. And then we also have the website, which is disabledparenting.org.
And one thing that's important for everybody to know about the Disabled Parenting Project is that we're cross disability. And so, for example, Kara and I, and actually you too, Pauline, we all have physical disabilities. But, we really strongly believe that as a disability community, we need to embrace parents with all types of disabilities, including intellectual and developmental disabilities, parents with mental health disabilities. And so it's not exclusive by any means to people who have physical or visible disabilities. And in fact, we really welcome with people with a wide range of disabilities.
Oh, good. So if you're watching this and you would like some peer support, great resources. They have a great blog that come out with different articles on parenting with a disability. I would highly suggest getting involved and engaging with the Disabled Parenting Project. Again, thank you so much, Kara and Erin, for sharing your experiences. Even in just this short conversation, I know it helped me, and I hope that other parents with disabilities will gain some strength. I think that's the most important, is that we get strength from each other, and a reminder of what's truly important as parenting, such as the values that we instill in our children and the feelings that they grow up with. We want to hear from you also as One Leg Up Productions. We want to hear what your experiences as a parent has been. Have you run into challenges, and how did you overcome them? If you could share below, and don't forget to subscribe and share. And if you'd like to see more content from One Leg Up Productions, please support us at patreon.com/One Leg Up Productions. Thank you, and be blessed.